Welcome to Inside Media Relations, the podcast for PR people serious about getting their stories covered. In this episode, being the voice, the decisions, pressure and judgment of a spokesperson. We're looking at what it actually takes to represent an organisation in the media today. I'm joined by Graham McQueen of DAA, one of Ireland's most experienced spokespersons, to explore what the role looks like in practice and how to perform under pressure. In our Inside the Product segment, I talked to Rob Carr about one of the critical moments in media relations, getting your email into journalists' inboxes. To start, I'm joined by Dylan Kerrigan, Senior Research Executive at Media HQ, to look at the latest trends that are shaping the media landscape. Let's get inside media relations. Welcome, Dylan. We're here today to talk about serious trends that PR people should look at and how to change their behaviour. The first one that you noticed is about the change in the coverage of sports and how the structure of sports media is changing.
Yeah, Jack, we've seen a massive kind of change in the sports media landscape over the last couple of months and years. But in particular, just 2 months ago, the Washington Post got rid of its sports department, basically, to cut costs, and there's numerous reasons for this. For one, audiences have moved to kind of more faster content. So us as sports fans, so we use social media so much now for news. It's a never-ending news cycle. Years gone by, you would have got your sports news from the newspaper only, but now stories are there 24/7 on social media. Whether it be transfer news during the summer, match reports, they're all there. So like the speed of news has changed as well. And
even with YouTube, like when Sky made that decision a few years ago to at 5 o'clock on a Saturday to put like 3 minutes of every game up online, that was a huge, and like Sky's always been a big disruptor, but even the overlap and there was news on the overlap recently as well.
Yeah, it's massive. Like in terms of the fan content, Gary Neville's The Overlap company just purchased the 2 biggest football fan channels in the UK, led by Mark Goldbridge. So the Man United fan channel, The United Stand, and then the more general fan channel, That's Football, for a 7-figure sum. And like these 2 channels have over, I think, the United Stand has over 2 million subscribers, and the That's Football has over 1 million. So it just shows you how many people are consuming.
And the overlap's interesting because it's like it's YouTube first, so it's one of those ones like some people would say, I heard someone say recently, I could never imagine listening to it on Spotify. I'll always want to watch it because you want to see Ian Wright reacting to Roy Keane, or you want to see the facial expressions. But you'd never really watch it on telly. You'd watch it on your phone. Or
It's a bit like the overlap's kind of like a comedy. You're getting comedy in it. You're getting your sports news. You're getting your conversation. It's like a group of lads down at the pub on years gone by, kind of talking about football and kind of having the joke, and it's really effective. But like I think the old model is kind of old sports broadcast models kind of outdated. We saw last week Football Focus on the BBC ending, and the BBC kind of said that the audience wasn't there for it anymore. And you mentioned Sky there, the way you get the Premier League, the 3 o'clock finish at 5 o'clock, and the highlights were up at 5 o'clock. So this kind of content, there's not much drive for it anymore. So you're nearly thinking, is match of the day?
That's probably next on the chat. Like, it's funny, a couple of weeks ago, the Irish women's team played in the Dexcom Stadium, and it was the largest crowd that ever came to a Women's Six Nations match. But I went with my 2 daughters and my daughter's friend Rose, but we had a wonderful modern media experience. We arrived in the stadium and the first person we met was the fantastic Megan Scully. Megan asked my daughter and her friend to do a clip for Connacht's Instagram. She then had me reminiscing on the Instagram about when I won my senior cup at what was the old sports ground. They sat down and someone from Irish Rugby came up and asked the 2 girls, could he mic them up for fan camera for the behind the scenes documentary. That was unbelievable. And then at 50 minutes in the game, I looked down and I saw what was definitely the best subs bench we ever brought on. and I shared it in the Her Sport WhatsApp group under the word Bomb Squad. Within an hour, Dylan, somebody had vectorized the picture, then somebody coloured it, and 10 minutes later it was up, and it's merchandise now called the Manaw Squad. And it's appeared even in, it's been name checked in a few different media, and there's fans going to matches on a photograph that I took. So you can see how fan content is really is really in the box seat.
We see that, like, there's fans who bring GoPros into stadiums now to film live reactions. They always do really well on social media, yeah, as we said, the old model is outdated. So
and PR people like Connacht Rugby, and I saw like Megan Scully was there for Connacht Rugby creating that content, and they were capturing that share of the audience. So if you're a comms person now, you have the strength and the ability to capture the stuff. You don't necessarily need to go through the traditional channels.
Exactly, and there's a lot of clubs as well with kind of in-house media teams now, so they're given, as you said, Connacht Rugby to do the behind-the-scenes documentary. If you look at England Rugby, for example, I've mentioned to you before, they kind of do the behind-the-scenes, what are the players eating daily, and different things like that, gym sessions. So all that content is there, produced by the clubs now. So the kind of, I think sports journalists are they're in the middle now. The kind of clubs, do they need to give them access anymore, if that makes sense? Because if they're producing all this stuff in-house, you know. But like, I think we need to make one thing clear: sports journalists will also, they'll always have the credibility. And I'll give you an example here. David Ornstein, one of my favourite sports journalists, and one of the most reliable transfer correspondents. He works for The Athletic. No matter what fan channel or fan kind of X page you follow, that would say someone is moving here, or there's talk of someone being interested in going to this club, everyone always goes back to David. Just once he confirms it,
he's the oracle. Yeah,
everyone knows it's true. So I think we need to make that clear. There'll always be a place for the credibility of sports journalists.
The next story, Sky are diversifying. They've got a new paid for service.
Yeah, so in the coming months, Sky are bringing out a defence and security app. So it's going to focus on high value users. This is who they'll be targeting with the content. So it'll be a premium feature. So it's part of the 2030 Sky model that they announced last year. So they want to move away from kind of being the traditional live breaking news channel that they are.
More high value added. And if you look at things like newsletters like Stratechery, which is strategy and tech, if you look at stuff like Politico, who sell paid for news services, even the Financial Times or The Economist, if you can give quality enough information, and I suppose it's also a reflection of the turmoil in the world right now. Jane's Defence Weekly had this area kind of garnered for themselves, and Sky are probably going to take them on now.
Exactly, yeah. And then it's about the kind of scale versus depth thing, Jack. They want to maybe they're targeting maybe not everyone in the public now. They want, if they can target a specific group to purchase these premium features, it's going to replace traditional revenue where so many kind of media companies are falling at the moment. So this is kind of their strategy for 2030, where they want to kind of lean into a digital newsroom for the kind of current digital media landscape.
And I suppose if you're a PR person on this, like, look at these new streams, look at where the extra value added in. I'm assuming that the users of these services who are paying dearly for them will be a very good audience for a PR person to reach as well. Finally today, journalists are building new audiences in digital media. Traditional journalists, if we say traditional in inverted commas, are building strong audiences. And one Irish journalist has done particularly good work on Instagram.
Yeah, so Richard Chambers, the Virgin Media journalist, he uses Instagram now as his main source of producing news and sharing news. He's gained over 100,000 followers, which is a crazy amount. And like it goes back to that thing now, like journalists are their own brand now, as well as Richard working for Virgin Media. He's his own brand, sharing his content with his 100,000 followers. And I was scrolling through his news videos there, and back in December, he shared a clip of President Zelensky visiting the Oris, and like amazingly, it's got 29 million views on Instagram, which is crazy. And if you think if he's doing a package on Virgin Media Television now, there's no way that's going to reach 29 million people. So
he might get, on a good evening, he might get a couple of 100,000 views. But if he shares it on digital and online channels, he, as you said, he reaches multiple millions. And it is this notion too of the fragmentation of the news. I have a friend who's a TV journalist, and he always says, "Who's watching this stuff?" So it can't but be good for them to find a new audience on a channel where there's probably a new younger audience as well.
Exactly, and PR people should be asking where, like, in terms of measuring their success now. I think the days are gone where if you're mentioned just in an article in the Irish Times, that is obviously still a success. But now, like, there's so much more. Like, you should be looking at how your engagement on social media, for example, how many views your story could be getting from a journalist. So it's going into that thing about like thinking before you send your press release, your audience, how can you make this story into something that could be visually picked up by the likes of Richard Chambers. You could be reaching so many more people by kind of doing these things.
Dylan, thanks for your time today. Some great insight around structural changes in audiences, around sport, around new media products, and around new audiences. Great insight and great feedback for PR people. Thanks for joining us. Graham McQueen is the head of media relations at DAA and one of Ireland's most experienced and recognisable spokespersons. He spent years representing a high-profile organisation under constant public scrutiny, handling live interviews, breaking news and complex situations. Being a spokesperson isn't just about communication, it's about judgment, timing and performing under pressure. What I want to explore is simple. What does it actually take to do this job well? Graham, you're very welcome. Thanks for coming today.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me on.
Good. It's interesting. As a football fan, you're at a good point of the year. You have two teams doing well. You have Bohs and you have Celtic doing well.
Yeah, Celtic's still hanging in there somehow. It's probably the worst Celtic team I've seen in a long time, but we've got a chance. And Bohs, yeah, we started the season really well, but Bohs is just a good time no matter what. Anyway, it's a great club to follow here in Dublin.
So you grew up in the town of Lockerbie in Scotland and you moved here over 20 years ago. Let's just start with Lockerbie for a minute. It has a huge place in world history because of that tragic event. What impact did that have on the town growing up as you, as someone from the town? What must have been massive, was it?
Yeah, it's huge. You don't really appreciate it at the time. I was, 6 when that happened, 1988. And I remember it happening. I remember being in the town, delivering Christmas cards and, the sky lit up. There was a noise. People didn't know what had happened. It was before social media. We actually didn't know what had happened until we watched the news. When we got home, there was a bulletin came on BBC about 7:20. That's how we learnt what happened in our own town, which is incredible now when you think of all the live feeds and stuff we have in our pockets. So, yeah, growing up was funny. I think the town kind of shut itself off from that. I think a lot of people resented the attention from outside. And that's kind of lasted up until, I think...
The notion that, a massive airplane would crash in the middle of a town and take out a whole street. It beggars belief.
Look, Lockerbie's a town you would never have heard of otherwise. Yeah. It's a postage stamp town in the very south of Scotland, about 10 minutes from the English border. We're on the right side of the border, though, thankfully. You'd never heard of Lockerbie, but that kind of lived with me right through life, I suppose. Even now, you meet someone, certainly over the age of 30, and you mention where you're from, and they are taken back to that time in 1988. I think it's one of those life events where everybody knows where they were when it happened. So that's kind of followed me through life. I actually love going back now. You didn't appreciate how beautiful the place it was.
And even in recent years that there's been the drama and there's been a documentary as well. So there's been kind of, recent kind of cultural storytelling about it. Did you consume any of that when it came out, or was it too weird for you, or did you watch any of it? The BBC one I watched, or the Netflix one I think I watched.
I've consumed some of it, but it is tough. I mean, I know quite a lot of people who were involved in the accident in terms of the aftermath. My own father actually was caught on the other side of Lockerbie. He was working and he couldn't get home. So I only learned a couple of years ago, talking to my mother, that she was sitting in the kitchen, not telling us, but she didn't know where he was. There was no phones back then, so he couldn't tell her, I'm delayed or whatever. So she just didn't know what had happened. So yeah, it's a funny one, but yeah, I think it's hard to consume that kind of stuff. I think a lot of people in the town shut off from it. I think a lot of people, I know friends of my dad who still won't really talk about what they saw and what they experienced, because it was pretty horrific stuff.
Yeah, and then like one of the things that was told in a lot of the stories about it was the spirit of the townspeople and the giving nature of the people of the town, and even the work that the women did to feed the rescue workers, or that Trojan work that was done on the rescue of items, and that was massive in convictions and stuff. But the local people really tugged out.
Yeah, I think the story that got me from those documentaries and stuff was the ironed all the clothes before they sent them back, and I think that's kind of indicative of the kind of people that are in that
cleaning
town.
the suitcases and making sure that people got people's goods back in good stead.
Yeah, look, I think it's good people. I think it's a family town. Everybody knows one another. It's that type of place, and I think that shone through in the documentaries, which was nice. But I think as a town, like I'd love us to have a footballer or something to come along and change all that. Give the town a name for a good reason. But we'll see if that comes in the future.
Yeah. So you arrived in Ireland over 20 years ago to cut your teeth in a career in journalism, and tell us a little bit about the early days and what you got involved in.
Yeah, well, I should say my wife will listen to this. So I moved here for my wife, not journalism. So just to be clear, she wasn't my wife at the time, but she's since become.
It's always great to follow love, isn't it?
Well, there you go. Had to take a punt somewhere. So no, I fancied a change from Scotland. Dublin seemed like a logical move. I could always remember, I was a big music fan growing up, and I always remember looking at the gig posters for the big bands, and you always had London, Manchester, Glasgow, and Dublin. And I always thought Dublin must be a happening place, because quite often the band wouldn't come to Glasgow, but they'd come to Dublin. So that always stuck in my mind. And I'd been here a few times. I thought, I'll give it a go. Journalism was what I studied in college. I had the choice between going into golf. I was a decent golfer as a young lad. So
you competed?
I could probably become a teaching professional rather than anything else. I was down
so you were scratch, were you?
I was down to scratch. I had the chance to become assistant professional at Murrayfield Golf Club, or move to Dublin, and I chose Dublin. So,
and did you competed all the way up underage then?
Yeah, that was my thing as a kid. Football and golf are my two.
Okay, and how well did you do on underage? Like, don't be modest now.
No, look, there's no Google for back then, thankfully, so you won't see how badly
I have a very vivid memory of one of my best friends winning the Connacht under 16 boys, and like getting a call that the final round was in a local golf club, and following him, and like that he won this in the home golf club. But like, it's very highly, it's interesting for the pressure that you deal with every night. Got like the pressure of sinking a putt and being on a red light on the 9 o'clock views. They're not that dissimilar in one regard. Like if you're in a competition.
I think I'm probably a better performer on the news these days in the golf course. So, but no, I still love the game. I'm glad I didn't make that choice of going into something that I loved, because I think it's a hobby that I still really enjoy today.
How good are you now?
I'm still scratch one there or thereabouts. So two kids,
very good.
two kids that hold me back. But but no, journalism was what I fancied doing. I think. Growing up, I actually wanted to be an air traffic controller, but I was never good enough at maths, so I went into the journalism
What
space.
gave you the growth to want to do that?
I don't know if it was a Lockerbie thing, or whether it was I just liked planes, I just liked the idea of travel, and it was something that looked a really cool job. So sort of 15, 16, that's what I wanted to be. But I remember the school guidance counsellor looking at my maths results and saying, maybe something in the creative space or in the where you're using words would be better. So I went to study journalism. I think I've always enjoyed telling a story. I think that's followed me through into the comm space. So, enjoyed journalism, moved to Dublin and went into business journalism. I would probably have preferred to do sport, but there was no opportunities. Went into business, and Dublin 2005 when I moved over was booming. So got in.
Height of the Celtic Tiger. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the first press conference I went to was Anglo-Irish Bank announcing their gazillionth year of consecutive profits or whatever, and I remember just the scale of the thing kind of caught me, and I was like, wow, this is huge. And then obviously 2 years later we were heading into full blown recession mode, and But covering that as a business journalist was fascinating. I was a journalist up until the end of 2013, so I got to cover the end of the Celtic Tiger, and then going through that recession piece, and then the kind of fight back. And I used to cover a lot of startup companies and things like that. So it was pretty. Looking back, it was a pretty cool time to be in journalism, particularly business journalism. But I'm glad I got out when I did, because I didn't have that. I think you meet a lot of journalists and they have that real love of it. And I never really had that. I had the love of telling a story, but not so much the
I
grind
got
of
out of it
journalism.
because I was too. I always maintain I was too positive in that there was so much negativity around all of the time, and I'm generally a very positive person. I'll always see the good in things. I'll always be kind of upbeat, and which is a great skill when you're running a business. But I just used to feel there was kind of relentless negativity, and whether it was covering crimes or deaths or murders, like I just thought, oh, life's too short.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, so I think I remember Nick Mulcahy, who was my editor in Business Plus magazine, said to me one day, he says, "You're not bad at this, Graham." I'm paraphrasing here. You're not bad at this, but have you ever thought of a move into comms and PR? And Nick had a way of telling you stuff at times that was basically him saying, "Right, time to move on, mate, and you might be better in this field." Because, and I think it was probably some of the best advice I ever got, because I've gone on to really enjoy.
And
the
so you went
jobs
from there
I've
to
had,
Dublin Chamber. Yeah.
Went to Dublin Chamber, and I was kind of involved in Dublin-related initiatives. And I remember doing my first interview with the Daily Mail, a couple of months after I joined. Incredibly raw, incredibly nervous, but then it just became a habit. And over the years, I think I was there 7 years, I became kind of synonymous with anything that was happening in Dublin. I think I was the voice of Dublin Chamber at that time, and I'd seemed to be on the Pat Kenny show once a week talking about something that was happening in Dublin. Got my first taste of everything from prime time to BBC and whatever was happening. So I actually really enjoyed that aspect, and I think the skills I learned back then have stood to me today.
So coming up on 5 years ago, an opportunity came up to work in DAA, and all those years on from thinking that you might want to be an air traffic controller, you get this job to work in a huge international airport. Tell me about when you heard about the job first, and kind of when you thought, oh God, maybe this is the time, or this is what I need to do.
Yeah, I think the airport, DAA, is just one of those companies, one of those places that I think if you're a comms professional, it's just got something about it. Like there's always something happening. I remember I got to know Paul O'Kane quite well when I was in Dublin Chamber. Paul was the chief communications officer in DAA at the time, and I was always looked at his job and thought, yeah, fancy that at some point. That'd be a good gig. And so when it came up, I never thought I'd get it. Often when you want something, it doesn't work out. But I remember getting in there and just was like, I'll take my time and I'll get going in this. And I'd always intended to send a press release out to say Graham McQueen has joined as media relations manager. And I think 2 weeks after joining, our operation completely hit the skids post-COVID, and we became a national scandal that summer. That
was the year of the queues and the tents outside and the queues and the queues.
That was it, yeah. So that was a couple of weeks after I joined. So a real kind of eye-opener. So I never needed to send that press release. Journalists quickly got to learn that Graham McQueen was in DAA. Yeah. So a relentless summer. Myself and Kevin Cullinan, who I still work with on the team, just felt like we're on the TV, on the radio, pretty much every day, explaining problems, what we were trying to do to fix it.
Talk to me a little bit about that as a spokesperson, and like for anyone watching or listening, is to like. There's an adrenaline that comes with this work where, the light goes on and you go on the camera and you prepare and you have to manage the message and you have to do all that. And there's a stress that becomes inbuilt in the job as well. So you go in, it's your dream job, you've wanted it a while, and it's a shitstorm. It's like, and then there's this thing with human emotion where it happens with cars and it happens in airports, which is a kind of an air rage, road rage thing where people's normal decorum and manners can kind of evaporate in those sort of situations. What is it like being in those situations? And when you're like, I know you have to do interviews one at a time, but there's a lot of pressure to prepare in those situations.
Yeah, I think the hardest bit back then was that we didn't have a clear story as to what had gone wrong. The surge in passengers hit us really quickly, and I don't want to go into that too much, but in terms of the media relations point of view, it was asking the people in command what's happening, why has it happened, What are we doing to fix it? And how can we reassure passengers and stakeholders like the minister was listening to us, the Taoiseach was listening to us. I remember at the end of May, we had a really, really bad weekend. You remember the scenes of people queuing way down Departures Road. It was on the front page of every paper. And I remember going into Ireland AM on Virgin Media on, I think it was the Monday or the Tuesday morning, and I sat down in the green room and all the papers were on the desk. And that's when it kind of hit me. Every front page of the Irish papers had Dublin Airport chaos, headlines. And I was like, shit, I'm speaking on behalf of this. And that's kind of when it hit me. I think your point about adrenaline's interesting because I think we did run on adrenaline for a lot of it. And I think one of my key learnings coming out of that was every now and again you have to pull yourself back and take breath, and because it was
so bad. I remember I was going, and this was repeated like tens of thousands of times over. I was going on my first family holiday post COVID, and I can remember gaming the system by, we were flying from Terminal 2, I think, and I went on the Ryanair website and bought everybody a $9.99 Ryanair flight so that we could get fast track in the other terminal, whichever was the other terminal.
Right.
And so that we actually had two flight tickets to get in past security. One which enabled us to get fast track, and I thought, God, that's mad that I actually did that. I spent like 80 or 90 quid just to kind of make sure we weren't queuing for 4 hours. Like, it was actually cheap at the price, actually.
Yeah, but the thing working in an airport is I get a lot of questions from people like yourself, people you know well, people you don't know so well. You just get the text message, I'm flying next week, what's happening, what can I do? And you're trying to give bits of advice and what have you. But it was an incredibly tough summer, few months. But like the learning that you get from it.
And when you go in a situation like that as a spokesperson, and like there's public anger, and then like in the transaction itself, in a transaction like we're having here now, you can be dealing with an angry or a testy journalist or someone who's just going to nail you to the floor. And like I used to laugh in politics. Like, I was always be very wary of the fellow who'd be all hail fellow well met until the red light would go on, and then they'd go through you for two shortcuts when it'd go on. I'd much rather somebody was real with me and say, look, I'm going to have to give you a hard time here. And like what's that? When you're preparing for that transaction and it's the 6 o'clock news, it's going to be 2 minutes long and the gun is going to go off, the red light's going to go on, and you will be judged by your bosses, your superiors, your colleagues and the public.
Yeah, no, it's tough, but I think you have to kind of put all that to the side and you have to focus on what's the conversation that you're having with that one person. If you think about the people at home listening, I think you start to trip over your words and you start to get sidetracked. So you've got to be really focused on who you're talking to. I think be very clear on the messages that you're trying to land. In situations like that, I remember being on Drive Time, for example, or Morning Ireland, they try and pull you all over the place, and you've got to really work hard to stay in the lane that you want to stay in. Answering the question, but not getting dragged away. That was tough at times. I remember one day it felt like I think I was on every show that day. It started with Morning Ireland, it went through to you'd be on Claire Byrne, you'd be on Pat Kenny, and then it got to Drive Time just after 5 o'clock. So the prime slot on Drive Time. It was Sarah McInerney, and I just remember halfway through that interview starting to slur my words, and it felt like I was tripping up. And I've never listened back to that interview to hear how bad it was. People tell me it wasn't as bad as how I remember it, but up until then, that day the interviews had been fine, but that just felt like I hit a wall. And I'd still to go on, I think it was the Ireland AM Tonight Show or something later that night as well, so there was more to come. But I really learned then that sometimes you have to say no to stuff. You have to take yourself out of it.
How do you individually prepare then? If someone says to you, look, this is happening tomorrow, like when you sit down, like what's your preparation process? So like, do you from visually taking notes to writing stuff out to just kind of getting stuff, like how do you prep admin yourself through something like that?
I sometimes I would write stuff down, kind of bullets of what I want to cover. But if I'm comfy on the topic, I tend to rehearse it in my head. My kids laugh at me in the car because quite often my hand will go like this, and my son will say, like, "What are you doing?" And then I catch myself on it, and that's me rehearsing in my head what I'm planning to say. But if I'm in the car on my own and I'm driving to, say, do an early morning show in the studio, I'll fully rehearse the interview, just talking in the car, answering questions, and so you've almost rehearsed your lines going in.
And would you do role play prep with colleagues, or do you ever do that?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes, depending on the topic. I'm blessed to have really good colleagues. So I hate when I go back to the office and people say, "Oh, I heard you on the radio. You're really good." It's like, doesn't mean anything. Like, I'd rather you told me, you could have said this or you could have done this. And I've good people around me who will tell you that. So I remember, if you're a good CEO, like I remember Dalton Phillips never really came near me on the media stuff. He just kind of left me to it. He had his trust, which was good. But the odd time he'd just pick up the phone and just give you a little nugget of something that you might say it this way or whatever. Like, that's really useful. Do we role play? A little bit. I think, especially if there's something we're in doubt about going on. So one example would be, like, we've been on Liveline.
Yeah.
We've been on Liveline a few times, and I know there's this crappy line that if you're on Liveline, you've lost the PR battle or whatever. I don't agree with that at all. I think it's certainly for a company like ours, it's something that we should embrace, and we've done that. But going on the likes of that, you would rehearse it. You would sit in a room and say, okay, if I'm asked this, what do I say? I think that goes back to having good connections within the wider company, though, not just comms people, but knowing people within the organisation. So it could be on the airfield, it could be in the ops room, it could be in security.
And when you agree speaking lines on a position, and whether it's about the CEO's position or whether it's about passenger caps or a new runway or noise pollution or electricity outages or software glitches, like, what's the process by, okay, the shit has hit the fan, we need to do this, what's the kitchen cabinet that decides, okay, here's the message that goes out on behalf of DA? Like, what does that process look like?
It depends, really. I mean, the nature, you've just read out a load of stuff there that sounds like a list of possibles, but that's all stuff that's happened in the airport, and you could go on and on and on for the last year or whatever. There's always something.
Drones flying over the
You name it. And we've a running joke on the team that it never happens 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. It's generally always in a Champions League game or when you're trying to play golf.
Software one, actually, as is our background. Like, it is funny, like, in the last 20 years of running a software company, like, every time there's an outage now or something happens on software, like, I always think, there for the grace of God go I. And, like, if someone says, oh, this is down, I'll say, I'll go for a cup of coffee, take a walk. It'll be like, it's 2026, it'll be back. And this notion where people get really stressed out about things, but it, like, what happens to prep in those cases so that you get your running orders to say, look, here's the key messages on this, or like, who would you go to say, look, okay, are these the agreed lines? Are we all happy with these?
Yeah, I think we'd generally be using WhatsApp, Teams, whatever, or be a video call, and we agree, okay, who's going on? If it's me, okay, this is what I plan to say. What if they ask you about this? What are you going to say? And then we kind of tease it out that way. You'd also be speaking to the people in the roles. So, like, an example would be, so last week we had a very sad fatality on the campus. Somebody was hit by a bus 5 past midnight. So you wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning and the phone's ringing from RTE. And I hadn't looked at my messages. The phone is on silent till 7 o'clock. And you're trying to learn what had happened. So you're phoning the right people. So you're phoning the duty manager in the airport to find out exactly what happened, and you're creating the story that way. And then I'm taking the lines to the team, and you're saying, okay, this is what I propose we say. Quite often we would form our stock statement first, and then you build any media activity on the back of that. So, and
everyone agrees that then, yeah. Everyone agrees, like, this is our template that we work from.
Exactly. And we tend to work on the basis that if it's a storm day, for example, and it's me fronting it up early in the morning, I keep going through the day. I actually love those days. I love a storm day. Shouldn't say that, but they're great fun because they're constantly evolving and it's busy, and the interviews are short and sharp, and you're giving people really important information. And my mates hate it because they're like, "Are you ever off the bloody radio?" kind of thing. But so you've done a good job.
You check in then, obviously, in a rolling story like that. The comms team check in a number of times because the templated statement will have to evolve as the day goes on.
Yeah, so look, I tend to be bang in the middle of that whenever it's related to Dublin Airport, certainly. So you'd be constantly, you'd be updating the statement based on the information that comes in. So storm days, you get that number of cancellations, the number of go-arounds and diversions is always changing. So I'd be connected in with the wider team and then bringing it back to the comms team. You'd be sending around the links to the interviews. You'd be constantly updating on which shows you're going on and what were the tricky questions. I think feeding that back to the team is often important. Like, what was the curveball question that you got on that one? Because if somebody else on the team is going on, then you want them to be prepared for that same one. I think you're also trying to process what other people are saying about it. So, it could be the minister is asked about an issue at Dublin Airport on the 1 o'clock news. So you want to be on top of that, because if you're then on Moncrief at 3 and he says to you, I heard the minister said this today, what's your response to that? You've got to know about that. So it's pretty all-consuming, but I like that. I think it's a job that's hard to switch off from, because it's intense. You never know when things are going to go wrong.
How do you manage that? Like, how do you manage the mental side of it, where, like, the adrenaline around public relations can be brilliant when you're writing it up, but when it passes, and like, we've all had days where it's been deadly quiet and deadly boring, and we think, oh, this is a bit dull. And,
we don't get too many of them. Like, we're in a much better place than we were. I'm talking about 2022, when we were on the front page of every paper going. It's a different animal these days. The pace is much better. But I think I've learned that, and I talk about this with the team, when you're busy, and you just go with it. You ride the wave, but eventually that wave calms down and you take your break, you take your breather. And people will say to you, make sure you take time back. And I'm always like, well, I'll get the time back eventually, but for the minute, we just ride with that. And whether it's a bad thing or a good thing.
Whether you're watching Bose on a Friday night, or your kids don't care. They just want to be with you. And they like one of the real challenges for people in your role, and I remember when I was a spokesperson, was that notion of, I was never great crack when I got called on a Saturday and I had to deal with some awful thing, and then I'd come back to the kids or the family and I think, I'd definitely, like, you're dealing with some angry journalist for half an hour and you think, God, I'm no crack now. And it, like, this thing of winding yourself up to have to kind of unplug from that, that's hard.
Yeah, I'd be honest, it's probably harder on the kids and Sinead, my wife, than it is on me. I'm in it and I'm in control of me, so I know what's happening, and I kind of go with it. Sinead's very understanding. The kids have kind of, like, the number of interviews I've done in the car on the journey to school in the morning. I think Joshua asked me there a couple of weeks ago, he's like, why do you sometimes on the phone, he can't hear the producer on the other end, he's like, why do you sometimes count to 5? And I was like, oh, that's because the sound engineer on the other side is checking my levels. And this was the thing he picked up from me. He didn't ask, no follow-up question, just like, why do you count to 5 ? Like,
that's hilarious. Talk to me then just a couple of nerdy things. And, like, this is far harder for women than it is it's far harder for female spokespeople than it is for men. But just, like, how you look, how you present yourself, your clothes, like getting your hair cut, making sure that like, there's a thing about body confidence where if you're wearing a jacket that you like, or you're wearing clothes that you feel comfortable in, you'll be a bit more relaxed. It's like, look, women have to spend infinitely more money than we do on makeup and hair and stuff like that. But it is a visual medium in lots of cases, and you do have to think that through.
Yeah, and I think we as a profession are much more casual than we used to be. I think that feeds into... My big thing when talking a lot of the time is reassurance. And I think I've had feedback on this, and I think what I aim for is to bring a calmness to situations. I think my voice and my style lends itself to that. So I think I would see what I wear, how I look, as an extension of that. I don't pay too much attention to it, though. I have to be honest. It's more, I'd be very much focused on, obviously you don't want to look scruffy or whatever. You want to be as sharp as you can be, but it's all about the message. So as long as you're not detracting from that. So if I was on the TV in a Bose kit, for example, wouldn't be appropriate, totally distracted. Nobody would know what I said, because they'd be like, that guy got a Bose shirt on. So, yeah, you'd alienate half the crowd. Yeah, but at the same time, I remember being on prime time in the height of our crisis in 2022, and the cameraman said to me, he says, are you not putting a tie on? And I had a shirt and a blazer on. And I was like, no, I'm quite happy with this. And he was almost offended that I wasn't putting the tie on. But look, I think that gives we have this battle at times between the public image of DAA versus the public image of Dublin Airport, which are kind of unique, different beasts. And we want the image of Dublin Airport to be a bit different, away from that corporate stuffy look. I think we want people to be warm to the brand and things like that. So I think we are more casual. That feeds into social media as well. Like I do a lot of that work. So the videos that you see there could be seen by multiples of who sees you on the news. So that said, you'd always have the Dublin Airport gear in the back of the car, because I've had it recently when I'm on the golf course or you're at the side of a football pitch and you get a call from the TV, can you be at the airport in half an hour to do an interview? I'd try and do as much of that as I can because it's good for relationship building and what have you. But so there are pictures of me with a Dublin Airport jacket on and the Bose gear is on underneath because that's who I happen to coach. I've got the golf shorts on, but the jacket kind of makes you look from here up. You get some funny looks off the presenters and the camera people, but like it adds to the whole thing. A big thing about me is I think I try and bring a bit of my own personality into what I do, and I think that kind of lends itself to that.
So before we finish with the quick fire round, just one reflection before we go into the quick fire round. Do you ever reflect now on that little 6-year-old in Lockerbie and that huge international airline tragedy and kind of where you've ended up, and even through a notion at one stage of maybe wanting to be an air traffic controller? Like, was it all serendipity, or was there an element of design in it, or how it ended up that way?
I never think about it that deeply. No, look, I'm pretty proud of where I've came from. Like, I think one of the funny things is that my folks never get to see me. They still live back just on the outskirts of Lockerbie. So when they come here at Christmas, for example, we do a lot of TV and media around Christmas. So they get a feel for what I do then. But they could ring me on a Sunday night and they'd be like, how's work? And I've been on the telly every day that week or whatever. So I quite like that. But no, I'm very proud of what I've done, what I've achieved. I don't know about the influence I'm having at home though. Like, I remember the Ireland Women's World Cup team were going off to the World Cup a couple of years ago, and I brought my kids in because they were in summer holidays, and I put them in the Ireland gear for the pictures and what have you. I think it was Virgin asked Sam would have been about 11 at that point. He's now 14, so they put a camera in front of him and said, how do you think Ireland's going to get on at the World Cup? And they were expecting 10 seconds. And 2 minutes later, he was still talking. And he was talking about, well, they need to watch out for such and such from Canada.
Yeah,
and all
the
this
apple
kind of
doesn't
stuff.
fall far from the tree, yeah.
So you realise then, a bit like the conversation with Joshua in the car about why you count to 5, they pick up a lot of this stuff. And so who knows?
They mirror what they see. So the rapid fire round. Question 1, what's one media moment that's changed how you work?
I think that interview with Sarah McInerney was a wake-up call that you can't just coast no matter how well you think you know the message. At some point, you've got to take stock and go back to the fundamental points you want to land, make sure you're ready, refreshed, your mind is clear, that sort of thing.
Give me one example of something that failed that you learned from.
I couldn't think of too many in that regard, but one would be we tried to talk about sustainability, and as a company, we weren't ready. And what we thought was going to be a really positive, confident PR campaign totally backfired on us. So a real learning then that you talk at the right time and when you're ready, and not because you think you should or need to. You have to, the timing's got to be right.
What's one universal belief about public relations that you think is wrong or overstated?
If any of my colleagues internally are listening to this, I'd like them to know that PR is not easy. It is difficult. I think I may make it look and sound easy, hopefully at times on the radio and the TV, but it is a skill. The other one would be PR is not the answer to everything. But I hate internally when people say, you guys will spin that. It's not what we do. That one would annoy me quite a bit.
What's one piece of advice that you wish you'd heard earlier in your career?
I think probably maybe flip that a bit. The best bit of advice I ever got was from a guy called Dermot O'Flynn, who was a journalist with the Examiner, former hurler, I think, for Cork. I was on a press trip once, and he said to me at the end of the press trip, me and him had a great bit of fun on that trip, and he said to me, whatever you do, he said, use your personality and you'll be absolutely fine. And he was a funny guy, so I took a compliment from that. But that stuck with me. Use your personality no matter what you're doing.
Great advice. Finally, name a book that you think everyone in your job should read?
I don't read PR books. I don't read a huge amount generally. I read Irvin Welsh books and golf books and stuff like that. If I was to name one work-ish book that I read, Stephen O'Leary from Politico, who you probably know, he gifted me a book a few years ago called Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yes.
And that's could be 10 years ago Stephen gave me that. But a lot of the principles of that book still apply, like especially for PR, like how quickly you react is key to the job. So a lot of the learnings from that book, that's still, I think, a lot of that sticks with me.
Graham, thanks for your time today. It was a pleasure to catch up. I learned loads. We had a chat not that long ago, but we went even deeper today, and thanks for sharing.
No bother. Thanks for having me on, Jack.
It's time to take another look inside the product. I'm joined again by Media HQ product lead Rob Carr to talk about the technology that's changing media relations today. And today, the thorny issue of how to make sure your email gets into a journalist's inbox. Now, Rob, we take two completely different approaches to this. You're the technologist, I'm the PR person. Talk to me a little bit about the anxiety, because I know you get called on calls about this. And did my email get in? That anxiety when people press send about does their press release get into journalists' inboxes?
Yeah, look, it's actually quite. I was reading something lately, and there's 400 billion pieces of email sent daily worldwide. That's a crazy number. It's a crazy number. And almost 50% of that is spam. It's things people don't want in their inbox, right? So I think that needs to be the starting point of any discussion on email deliverability. And what's happening right now, and what's been happening the last couple of years especially, is the big email inbox providers, you know them well, they're Outlook, they're Google. They've been putting more and more measures in place to make sure that this spam doesn't reach your inbox. But of course, the other side of that is that emails you want to get into the inbox also find it harder to get in there. So that's the thing we work with every day.
So last year, the team at Media HQ, which you had an instrumental role in, achieved the unbelievable statistic of 99.3% of all emails into primary inboxes. And without getting too wonky and technical, what is behind the result of delivering 99.3%?
Well, I mean, very first, Jack, we have to give a lot of credit to our research team as well, remember, because they do a lot of fixing the bounces and stuff like that, which is really, really important. But the other part of that is understanding what we've taken, the way we've looked at it in Media HQ is we've taken email deliverability not just as a feature or send feature, it's actually strategic infrastructure that we have in the company. We are the experts at getting emails, getting press releases into journalists' inboxes. That's the view we take. And there's a couple of very technical sort of elements around that. Now, PR people don't have to understand those.
Yeah, well, I suppose
elements,
let's just decode it from a little bit point of view. So I suppose one, to use the analogy that like when I go to West Cork and if Amazon deliver me something, it's the local postman that hands me. So on post does the fulfillment for Amazon. So there is a bit here where if you send through a technology like Media HQ, you send through the technology, but it comes from your email address.
Absolutely.
And there's a little thing called DNS that you have to verify. And that's basically saying, I'm given permission for you to send this through Media HQ. And that means then that the receiving email person, whether it's the Irish Times, the RTE, the door is open wider and welcomes it in.
Absolutely, Jack. And you couldn't have said it any better than I could. And essentially what it is, and it's not just... This isn't just something you should do anymore. It's something you absolutely have to do. Like I started here, the big providers like Outlook and Google demand that you do this anymore. Not having your DNS verified, and it's a very simple procedure. Is just not an option anymore.
And then the second part of it, then obviously you said, look, and we'll deal with this we'll deal with this in every episode that we do. But the quality of the research is paramount. But the second big technical part of it then is that your internet protocol is of a very high standard, what we call your IP address. And we're lucky in Media HQ that people trust us to share everything from national budgets to drugs busts to major job announcements. But that reputation is like it's hard won, and it's one piece of email at a time.
It's very hard one. I mean, when you get a new IP, you actually have to warm it up so it starts to get that reputation. And you know, we have a 99% delivery rate of Media HQ.
Yeah. It's mad, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's brilliant.
Because like I've been that PR person back in the dark ages where like you'd send something out and the stress of the day that like you have a big announcement, it could be a jobs announcement, it could be something that's going to hit a news desk and your phone will light up. And the minute you press send, like your status before you press send and your life status afterwards are completely different. And it's how people get addicted to that rush. But what happens when you press send and like 10 of the 100 come back with the best will in the world? You're not fixing those 10 in that day. And then 10 minutes before you send the next one, you think, oh God, I didn't do that.
And I guess the thing, people, it's not just that those 10 don't land, but those 10 bounces actually damage your sending reputation. So we spend a lot of time fixing bounces straight away, making sure things that bounce repeatedly go on suppression lists. So that means we're not sending out email that looks like spams. Because after all, we're sending mass email, like up to 300. And we only allowed 300 because any more than that, you start to create problems as well. But we work very hard to make sure that anything that damages our reputation, and repeated bounces being a huge one, doesn't happen.
And then I suppose, look, just in the background then, and like, look, this has to happen and it's essential, but security is a big part of it. So two-factor authentication, you know, login protocols with company domains, not letting, you know, Mickey Mouse at hotmail.com on the domain. All of that builds your strength as well.
Absolutely. I mean, that's really important. I mean, the idea that you're sending from your own domain, that you have that domain verified for sending through Media HQ, and you have full control of that domain is really, really important. Anything coming from gmail.com or anything like that, you know, it's very hard to build a reputation with
It's really funny though. Like I was in my local hardware store recently. I was hiring a power wash because my wife had got me to power wash the patio, and the guy said to me, "You'll get an email now. It may go to your spam or your promotions." And I said to him, "Can I ask you a stupid question?" And he said, "Do you say that to everyone who comes in?" And he said, "I do." And I said, "Is that a pain in the arse?" He said, "It is." And I said, "Do you know what's behind that?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Have you got a pen and paper?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Verify your DNS settings." I said, "Can you talk to whoever? Just ring them up and say, I need to verify so that I'm not talking to customers 50 times a day." He said, "That's really helpful." And I said, it'll change your life. And I suppose there's a bit here where the amount of work it saves people if they're not fixing bounced emails to go and do those other PR jobs that are necessary.
Absolutely, of course it does. And that's, I mean, again, I started this off by saying, you know, we see our email sending infrastructure as strategic part of what we do. It's core to what we do. And we want to make sure that people just don't have to worry about that at all. And I mean, you know, there's a whole lot of things as well, of course, that PR professionals can do. We always talk about targeting, building an audience and targeting the right audience. Well, targeting the right audience isn't just about the people who are interested in your press release. It also helps to build your reputation. If journalists are opening your press release, if they're interacting with your press release, if they're not opting out or unsubscribing from your press release, if they're doing all those things, it builds the reputation of sending. And the next time you send, you actually have a better chance getting your press release into the inbox that you want it to be in.
Thanks for joining me today, Rob. That was really interesting. We managed to take something that's highly technical and I think it was very palatable.
I've bored enough people with this.
But I do think that, like, look, it's the one thing that everyone obsesses about. And on the help desk, most people will ring and they're like, when you analyse all the tickets, it's, did they get my email? So thanks for bringing some light to that today.
You're welcome, Jack.
Thanks for tuning in today to Inside Media Relations. Thanks for your time. If you like the show, please like and subscribe and tell everybody about it, and come back for the next episode when we'll get more Inside Media Relations.